It certainly could have gone smoother. There's no denying that. But a win is a win. Game 1 out of 82 is out of the way. And despite being down several starters at one point, despite having given up a 19-point lead in the second half, the Memphis Grizzlies survive in overtime behind an outrageous performance by Ja Morant. The highlight reel is strong already. Damichael Cole and I will talk to you about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you find podcasts. We are also available on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at Locked On Grizz, and you can find my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole, you see there, at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax on my end. We are on Stitcher, on Spotify, literally anywhere you can get a show that's a podcast. You can find this show and subscribe, rate, review. Let us know how we're doing in the comments. It's all appreciated as we get the season underway officially here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael Cole, I have to say, I know Sean used to give you a hard time for the suit and the tie. I'm not going to be that guy as long as you don't judge me for my hoodie here. But you look good, and obviously, as the beat writer on the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal, you are looking dapper because you are fresh out of FedEx Forum. How are you feeling coming off of what was a memorable opening night for the Memphis Grizzlies?
Memorable indeed. And I mean, I'm just at the point. It's hard sometimes because I'm working, but you just want to soak all this up. I mean, because it happens so fast, and you're caught in between. I'm writing deadline stories, and I'm writing stories, that buzzer stories that are supposed to be done, right after the game, things like that. And it's like, man, sometimes you want to just be in the moment of everything that's going on. And this was one of those games. I mean, Joe, so many plays, right? So many plays where I'm going to rewatch the game and rewatch and just shake my head like, how did that happen? How did John make this block? Or how did he make this floater? Or how did he make this layup? And how did Santi do this? It was amazing. But overall, Grizzlies win. I think that Knicks team is actually better than some people probably gave them credit for coming into the season. And that was an encouraging, I think, start for the Grizzlies.
They're certainly more scrappy, right? I think that's fair to say. In a Tom Thibodeau team, maybe we shouldn't be surprised that they were not willing to lie down when they were down 19 there in the third quarter. They scrap back, as you mentioned. They get to overtime, but the Grizzlies had the megastar in Ja Morant, and that was the major difference. Not that there weren't other players that contributed to the effort. There certainly were, and we'll talk about them throughout this episode. I was curious, you mentioned the various highlight plays that Ja Morant made, and watching it on television like I did, I got a kick out of when Ja would make a play and it surprised even himself. Like the pass after the behind the back dribble to Brandon Clark comes to mind. And it was almost like the Dwayne Wade, LeBron James throw the ball up and your arms are out. Like he barely looked to see if the layup was even made. I don't know if he believed in Brandon Clark that much, or he was just that excited that he was able to make that kind of play. But Ja Morant in general, obviously a massive MVP-esque kind of line, made a major defensive play like you mentioned before. But I think what really stood out for me with Ja was the continued emphasis on adding tools to the toolkit, right? He tried to take mid-range jumpers. Maybe he wasn't as effective with those shots as he wanted to be, but you saw him consciously making them. He certainly was a threat from three. And if he can convert at that rate from three, that's going to make opposing teams have to start going over on screens against him, and it's going to be lights out, game over. You're not going to be able to go over on screens against Ja Morant unless you're bringing a double team, and in that case, somebody's open, and Morant has shown that he can find those guys. So seeing Ja entering his final year here of his rookie contract, obviously before the max extension kicks in, what were some things watching him there in FedEx Forum live that stood out to you as opposed to what he looked like, about 6 months ago in April and May?
I sent out a tweet, Joe. I said, scary news to report here from FedEx Forum. And it said, Ja Morant looks even better.
Right.
And this is something I've thought for a while. Watching him in preseason, watching him just the way he carries himself, you can see it. And when you watch this game, Joe, I mean, for one, why do I think this? I mean, the athleticism, everyone he knows about that. We're not even talking about that. That's been there since year one. The game is so slow to him. That pass to Brandon Clark, before he even passes to him, he fakes behind the back. He told me he got that move from Chris Paul. Last year I remember him telling me he got that move, that exact move, the fake behind the back. You throw it behind your back, but you fake pass it to the teammate while you're going behind your back. He got that move from Chris Paul, and he faked it to whoever it was in the corner there, thinking that the defense was going to shift over there. And the defense didn't really shift. The defense stayed connected to Ja, but I don't know how he had this sense in the back of his head to think, defense didn't shift. Most players take a charge right there. Instead, he goes to his next option, and it all happened in a blink. He does the behind the back pass, and it kind of happened in one motion. He dumps it off to Brandon Clark, easy finish, and it's like he knew he was going to be there. And he never even had time to really look at him, but that just goes to show the game is slowing down. He's seeing so much more in so much less time. And that's why it's a big reason why I've talked so much, Joe, about how he's going to be an improved playmaker this year. So 9 assists to 6 turnovers. The 6 turnovers, I mean, he had the ball in his hands a lot. I think, when you get guys like Dillon Brooks back, Tyus Jones playing more of what will be his regular role and things like that, the turnovers will go down. Not concerned about that. But the 9 assists, I think that's here to stay. Maybe not average 9 per game, but his ability to find teammates and get them easy baskets like he did Brandon Clark on that play, or like he did later in the game after that block and got Brandon Clark the alley-oop, later on. That's who he is now. That's why I think he's a better player. We saw the defense. I thought even on the play where he fouled Evan Fournier on the 3, if you just look up to the leading up to that shot, he's in a defensive stance. He's squared up, and Fournier can't shake him. I mean, Ja Morant he looks like a beast, man. It's scary. It's a scary thing for opponents. And the Grizzlies were down a couple guys too, so you got to take that into effect as well.
And by the end of the game, they were down Desmond Bane. I know you and others reported. Taylor Jenkins said it was just cramps. It kind of looked like his back again, which made a lot of folks on Grizzlies Twitter nervous. But again, the official word from Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Grizzlies, is cramps. Desmond Bane should be all right moving forward. I really want to drive home the point, and I talked about this on the Grizmas episode of Locked On, the idea of Morant playing defense, because somebody in the comments mentioned the idea of why is that so important to his MVP cause, because he mentioned somewhat fairly Jokic, Doncic. Those aren't guys that are known for their defense. Why does Morant get held to that standard? I thought that was a fair question. I wanted to explain it briefly. It's going to create more offensive opportunity for Ja. And I think that you saw some of that tonight in terms of getting out in transition. If he can create a steal on his own without having to worry about someone getting him the ball on an outlet pass, that's just going to allow for his speed to continue to increase, the time that he's going to have as he processes the game faster, like you mentioned. It just is going to put him in a different stratosphere in terms of what he's capable of. And I like how his usage rate compared to his assist rate is likely going to improve this season if he can continue to play the way that he showed in this game. Because that's what an MVP does. An MVP doesn't just play defense, obviously. An MVP creates for others and makes teammates around him better. I think that's one of the best compliments you can give a player like Ja Morant. It's not just him going out there and dominating the game. He makes John Conchar better. He makes Santi Aldama better. Those are two names that I'm sure we'll talk about in our next segment. But finishing up here with Ja, Damichael, one of my favorite things about how he plays is people like to point out how Tyus Jones, the Grizzlies had a better record when Ja Morant was out. Tyus Jones is a very good basketball player. He does not make his teammates better in the same way that Ja Morant does. And that's not a knock on Tyus. It's a testament to just how good Ja Morant is.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And he's a leader.
Right.
He's a leader. Just watching him on the court in this game, I mean, I've seen it for a while now, but Santi Aldama, for example, there was a sequence early. There were a couple sequences he had with Santi Aldama that really stood out to me because that's your new guy in the starting lineup. John Conchard's a little bit more experienced, so incorporating him into the starting lineup a little bit easier. Santi Aldama, starting with these guys, there was a sequence I think near the end of the first quarter. Near the end of the first quarter, Ja Morant goes to the bench and he's talking to Santi Aldama. You just see Aldama, just nods his head, just says, "Look, I got you," and you can see Morant pouring into him, telling him exactly what he wants him to do. Then later on in the game, everyone remembers this. This is when Santi Aldama dunks on Julius Randle and flexes, right? He flexes and lets out this loud scream, gets a technical foul for taunting and all that, even though Santi Aldama said after the game that, it was natural emotion taking over. He was not looking at or flexing at Julius Randle. He was just, looking in that direction.
It was a totally innocent flex. In his
words, Joe. So after that, he got the technical foul. He's walking off, and I remember him kind of he huffs his shoulders a little bit. He goes to the refs. He says, "What did I do?" And Ja Morant comes over there. Ja Morant gets right in front of him, kind of puts his head in his chest, and he's just like, "Don't worry about it." Like, who cares? Basically, Ja Morant didn't care about the technical. Really, none of the Grizzlies did. But those little moments of leadership where a young player like Santi Aldama, you don't want to make many mistakes. You can feel like, oh, man, I just took the momentum away from our team because I just committed a silly technical foul.
Yeah.
But when you have the team leader saying, man, don't worry about that. We don't care about that. That's confidence. That's that confidence boost. So Ja is really displaying that too.
He is very much one of the top 5 to 10 players in the National Basketball Association. That was on display in this one. But he's not doing it alone, and we'll talk about that more in our next segment. But before we get to that, I do want to give a shout out to betonline.net. They are your number one source for betting, not just football, of course, in this football season, but it's the start of the new basketball season, and you can get all your betting information from betonline.net. You can find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including the Major League Baseball playoffs, MMA fights, boxing, golf, the NFL, college football, and of course the NBA, is betonline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. Damichael, let's stay positive for a moment because Ja Morant was a pretty major positive in this game for obvious reasons, but he wasn't alone. There are some things that the Grizzlies can improve upon. You don't lose a 19-point lead by accident, but there were some really positive signs coming out of this game. And you mentioned in the first segment, Santi Aldama. It's fitting that on Christmas, Santi Claus came, right? Santi shows up and he posts an 18-point on 14 shot, 11 rebound, 3 made threes, 1 block, 1 steal. He actually led the Grizzlies in plus minus in this game, Damichael. Ja Morant was a +1, evidence that plus minus for an individual game does not always reflect what actually occurred. But Santi Aldama did lead the team. That means that while he was on the floor, Memphis was 18 points better than the New York Knicks. What was it like to watch him there in the Forum? Because for me, what really stood out watching on television was he wasn't just doing it on putbacks, right? He was creating off the dribble. He was facilitating for others. He got a Steven Adams foul drawn. Adams missed both free throws, but the fact that he was able to put Adams in a position to have the easy shot to get fouled on in the first place, he didn't look like someone that was too small for the moment. He looked very much ready for the opportunity to be filling in for Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, and we've talked about it, right? Taylor Jenkins pointed out all these things over the course of preseason and over the summer, shooting, defensive versatility, playmaking, as all these different variables that will be important to who becomes the starting power forward. And we knew Santi Aldama has these things. It's just a matter of putting it together. I didn't know he had the playmaking, and then you just start to see it kind of pour out. And you mentioned the play with Steven Adams where he does this nice, and I remember seeing his face after that. You know, he knew he dropped it off to him too. He kind of made the face where it's like, I just made a good pass. So Santi Aldama, I really like, what he's doing in this role in particular, because I'm a big advocate because you have Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, who are, quite frankly, two very efficient scorers, at their positions. I'm fine with both of those guys taking a bunch of shots. In this game, Desmond Bane did not shoot the ball well, but come on. I mean, we've watched Desmond Bane long enough to know he can come back the next 3 games and shoot incredibly. It's not
going to last long.
It's not going to last long. So with that being said, you want to have guys around them that you feel like can play their roles, can take shots when they need to take shots, but won't force the issue, And Santi Aldama is just that. Santi Aldama is not going to do more than you ask of him. You see the 3-point shots that he took. At no point you're like, oh, that's a terrible shot. Right. They all came within the flow of the offense, or he was wide open. He made smart decisions, taking it off the dribble from time to time. And then defensively, he had 1 block, but throw it out the window because he altered some shots. I remember seeing, right. RJ Barrett shot 3 of 18 in this game, and a big reason why I remember seeing him drive to the basket, and Santi Aldama coming from the weak side, just putting his arms up and just being a guy who could affect shots. So we don't even – the question about the power forward thing is over and done now. As this is the starting power forward until Jaren Jackson Jr. gets back.
Probably should be. And I think that, when you're the second best player for your team in your opening game in that role as that important starter, he has a better handle than I thought he would. He's certainly not elite in that area, but the fact he can get to the basket off the dribble, we've talked a lot about on the show how the positions 1 through 4 in the offense of the Grizzlies are relatively interchangeable. Aldama feeds into that energy. He certainly has that capacity. Another major positive here, and you're going to be proud of me here, Damichael, because this is growth. All right, this is growth for me.
Uh-oh.
I have voiced concern about John Konchar and whether or not his increased usage could actually connect to continued efficiency from 3. For at least one night, John Konchar took 9 threes, which I don't have the number in front of me, but I'm fairly confident in saying that's a career high for John Konchar.
He made 4 of them.
And he made 4 of them. And he also had 11 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals. I'm not going to be super excited like others might be in the Jitty Army that he started this game. Hopefully that's not a long-term thing. Again, Dylan Brooks being out, Zaire Williams being out. That probably had something to do with it. But it's good evidence to suggest that when he fits into his role like LaRavia and Roddy were in this game, 14 to 16 minutes a game off the bench, he can do what this team needs him to do in terms of taking and making threes at a higher volume. So Konchar still being elite as a rebounder on the perimeter while also staying within his efficiency as a 3-point shooter and increased attempts. That was a positive thing for me to see tonight, Damichael.
He was great, right?
Yep.
I mean, and let me be honest with you. I wasn't even worried about John Konchar for the same exact reasons that, as great of players as Dylan Brooks and Jaren Jackson Jr. are, is not because defensively, Grizzlies get a 19-point lead with those 2 playing defense. You're probably not going to relinquish that lead having those 2 guys on the defensive side of basketball. But offensively, it kind of relaxes things a little bit in my mind because Everyone in the world knows what my main concern with this Grizzlies offense is. It's shooting, right?
Shooting.
Soon as the game starts, really before the game starts, when the starting lineup is announced, and I see that John Conchar and Santi Aldama, we've seen Santi Aldama shoot the basketball really well in preseason from three-point range. In my mind, I immediately thought John Morant is going to be in this game with 3+ three-point shooters in this starting lineup. Desmond Bane made 3 3-pointers. John Conchar, who volume hasn't been there, right, Joe? But
No.
But the percentage, 40+% last season. And then, Santi Aldama, his improved confidence. And I knew then this team's going to shoot the ball better. Next thing you know, they're taking, 53 pointers in this game. And you had all these guys just chugging away. Santi Aldama letting it ride. John Conchar. And we talked a lot about this mid-range shooting and stuff like that. How about this? Taylor Jenkins, the emphasis, he wants 3-point shots and layups. He doesn't even want, guys taking that many mid-range jumpers and things like that. He wants them taking 3-pointers and layups. And we saw that in this game. But with John Conchar in particular, he's a perfect fit, beside Desmond Bane and John Morant, especially with John Morant's attacking style. And, teams are going to, stay attached to Desmond Bane all times, just having that other guy. We saw in the preseason how many, wide open looks Dillon Brooks would get. And I mentioned that he played within the floor of the offense, but he would miss some of those looks. John Conchar is not going to miss as many. Defensively, he's not Dillon Brooks. He's sound, but he's not Dillon Brooks. But offensively, what he did from 3-point range, I don't think you have a big drop off there. And that's why the Grizzlies were able to kind of succeed with him still in the game.
The Grizzlies development system is batting 1,000. And these two names that we talked about in this segment, Santi Aldama, John Conchar. Aldama was the second Grizzlies pick. That was the 30th overall selection in terms of the end of the first round. John Conchar was an undrafted free agent. And these are two guys that had very large roles in the Memphis Grizzlies winning their first game of the season to start the 2022-2023 campaign. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen, game-to-game NBA, every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game-to-Game on Locked On NBA. Follow Game-to-Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. When we come back, we were just pretty positive, I would say, Damichael. There's some things, again, you don't lose a 19-point lead and things be all sunshine and rainbows. Where can the Grizzlies get better heading into a pretty busy stretch upcoming over the next, I think, 5 days? They've got 3 games in the next 5 days. So what can Memphis do to improve where they showed some signs of weakness against the Knicks? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, my first concern in terms of weakness, you mentioned shooting and how important that is. 3-point shooting wise, the Grizzlies were fine. They were 17 of 50. I think they're close to a franchise record, if not tying the franchise record.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, but in terms of overall shooting, they were 42 out of 108 shot attempts, which is 38.9%. That's not going to get the job done on most nights. From the free throw line, although there were some signs of positivity, Ja Morant was 9 for 11 from the charity stripe, for example. That's major growth for him. The team as a whole, 14 of 23. That's 60.9%. So the 3-point shooting showed some signs of life, especially in terms of the attempts that were taken. But they have to be more efficient in their offensive game. You mentioned Desmond Bane struggling, 6 for 22. Tyus Jones was 6 of 16. Conchar, again, 9 of his 11 shots were threes, but that means he was 0 for 2 from 3. You want to see these numbers. David Roddy, forgetful opening offensive performance, at least, going 0 for 6 in terms of his shooting attempts. So you want to see that efficiency improve. Shooting 39% from the field isn't going to get the job done on most nights, Damichael.
Yeah, it's not. But they played good enough defensively, holding the Knicks to 40% shooting to kind of balance that out.
And the Knicks were ice cold from three. They were 24%.
Yeah, they were ice cold. And you mentioned the free throw shooting. Uh, it's like you can't have your Kool-Aid, your sugar, your peanut butter, your jelly. Like you can't have them at the same time, right? The 3-point shooting is good. It's like, oh, that's one of the weaknesses, looking better. And then the free throw shooting rears its ugly head, as well as a 14 of 23. And we saw Ja, actually look encouraging, which is really good, because Ja is going to get to the line a lot this season, as we saw, in this game. But, Tyus Jones uncharacteristically misses a couple free throws that could ice the game. And, Steven Adams missing free throws. And I've seen him put in a lot of work at the charity stripe in practices. So it's not like he's not working on it. People keep, are they shooting free throws in practice? Yeah, they're shooting
literally every day.
And I can tell you from what I see, no one shoots them more than Steven Adams. And, so it's not like it's for a lack of effort. It's just the results, aren't there, it's for the work. So that's a concern, because you look back in this game and you see, they shot 14 of 23 from the line. They make more free throws. There's no overtime. It doesn't even get to that point, and then you think about it from the perspective of, going forward, when you get in those situations, you want to be able to ice those games out, put teams away. And that's where, free throw shooting is going to have to improve. And then, I think I'm splitting hairs, here just, with this issue I took, Joe. And it's more about, just the lack of creators. Mm-hmm. Again, I think Ja was Ja, but you got to remember, Ja had to be Ja in order for, this performance to happen, in order for the Grizzlies to win. He could not afford an off night, because quite frankly, I think the Grizzlies, as rosters currently constructed, having guys create their own shots is going to be a challenge. And this is where you miss Dillon Brooks, because Dillon Brooks can do that. And I think Zaire Williams is on the way to being able to do that. And those guys missing, it showed. That's how you lose a 19-point lead, when you're basically relying on 1 to 2 guys, Tyus Jones some in a way too, to create shots for not only themselves but for teammates. And that's why it would go stagnant a couple times, Joe. At least that was my takeaway. The lack of shot creators kind of put them in some tough positions, which led to, tough offensive possessions, long rebounds, easy scoring opportunities for the New York Knicks.
They missed Dillon Brooks in that way. And I think in general, they missed Dillon, Zaire, obviously, Jaren. You could easily argue 3 of their best 7 or 8 players didn't play in this game. And you could see that in terms of the bench and how things went when the reserves went against one another. Cam Reddish, who I don't know how familiar you are with my take on Cam Reddish. I think Cam Reddish is terrible. He did not look terrible in this game at all. He made me look very silly in terms of the way that he played. I think you can make an argument he was the best, if maybe Julius Randle. But beyond that, you can make an argument that he was the best player for the Knicks in this one. And then Isaiah Hartenstein, who I was really interested in as a potential signee for the Grizzlies as a 3rd or 4th big, depending on how the roster shook out. He looked pretty darn good in 40 minutes of play himself. Mitchell Robinson dealt with foul trouble a lot of the night, and Hartenstein played well, so Tibbs rode the hot hand. But that's 2 reserves in particular that outpaced pretty much the entire Grizzlies bench in terms of productivity. So I understand that a lot of that has to do with injuries and depth, and not many teams are built to withstand being down 3 of their best 7 or so players. But at the same time, part of the major arguments for why the Grizzlies are title contenders is their depth. You need to see more from the rookies. You need to see more from that reserve unit. One of the major reasons that things went the way they did for Memphis in the second half was when the reserves came in, the Knicks made their run.
Yeah, exactly. And I was looking at it during the game, and I saw, the way Cam Reddish was scoring. It was like, man, he might outscore the Grizzlies bench by himself.
Right.
And you look at the top tier Western Conference teams, the teams that the Grizzlies are going to have to play. I was just watching Christian Wood score 16 consecutive points for the Mavs.
Pretty good.
Comes off the bench. these teams have weapons. We saw a couple days ago Jordan Poole, right? Coming off the bench for Golden State, he's a bucket. Instant offense. Who's instant offense for the Grizzlies? That's the question that'll be answered. Some people might say, "Oh, Brandon Clark's instant offense. He averaged double figures last season." That's possible. Tyus Jones, when he wants to be aggressive, he can be really assertive.
But you wouldn't qualify either of those guys as instant offense.
Yeah, exactly. Which is where I was kind of circling back to, because that's what it comes down to, and that's why they have those scoring stretches where they go cold and things like that. But I will say this: when I watch this game, and I'm very firm in having this takeaway too, because the rookies, they're young, they're taking their lumps right now. You mentioned David Roddy shooting 0-6. I think Jake LaRavia made his first 3-pointer, right? How about that? Made his first 3-pointer,
and that thing was sweet. It didn't touch anything but the bottom of the net.
Exactly, and then he made a clutch steal down the stretch in the fourth quarter. But outside of that, I think the rookies just, they're not ready right now, and they're not expected to be ready. It's no
correct.
Big deal. I mean, remember Santi Aldama at this point last season? Remember Zaire Williams at this point? Because he actually played.
Zaire was one of the worst rotation players statistically in the entire NBA before he got injured.
Exactly. So I think the situation right now that they're gearing towards, Joe, when Jaren Jackson Jr. gets healthy, and remember, we're talking about a couple weeks removed from a couple weeks from now, possibly doing 5 and 5. When Jaren Jackson Jr. gets back, that second unit could be Tyus Jones, John Conchar, Zaire Williams, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark.
That looks a lot better tonight than it did 24 hours before.
It won't, without two rookies in it. Oh, now that removes my questions about the bench, because I think Santi Aldama, his playmaking and the way he plays off of some of those guys, Zaire Williams, the way he'll be able to play off of some of those guys, and I think they'll be able to cancel out a little bit more because they won't be playing in super large stretches anyway. They'll be able to cancel out the lack of shot creation a little bit more, because they'll have a lot of shooting, and quite frankly, just a lot more talent, a lot more ready talent, I would say, than David Roddy and Jake LaRavia at this point.
And talent that is distributed the way it's supposed to, in terms of being a starter versus being a rotation player coming off as a reserve. Again, Conchar, Aldama, they did good things in this game. If you're trying to win an NBA championship, they're probably not starters on your roster. Strong reserves, certainly possible. But they were contributors in this victory for the Grizzlies, and I'm sure they will continue to be moving forward, regardless of the health status. They're probably in that 10-man rotation now. The way you outlined it is probably exactly how it's going to be. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. The NBA season is here. The Memphis Grizzlies won their opening night game. Our local NBA experts and insiders have you covered on and off the court all season long. All the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get podcasts. On our week finale, Damichael, you are going to be flying solo, and you're going to be talking about, I should say, the busy weekend ahead of the Memphis Grizzlies. No rest for the weary, so to speak. In some ways, it's kind of good that they're getting some of this out of the way early, when in theory they are as fresh as they can be. But on the other hand, again, Jaren's out. Dylan Brooks, who knows what's going to happen with him. Zaire Williams, same kind of idea. I'm sure you'll have an update for everybody heading into the Fridays in the weekend slate of games. But just kind of give a preview of what you're going to talk to folks about, previewing a busy weekend for the Grizzlies early in the season.
Yeah, two big games coming up, and these are big games. They play in Houston against the Rockets, then play the Mavs, and on the night after, so back to back. And not only is it a back to back, Joe, we're talking about the Grizzlies coming off of the overtime game at the start of the season. Taylor Jenkins didn't want to play those guys that much. We're talking about Desmond Bane cramping up. I'm watching overtime. I'm literally John Morant standing right in front of me, hands on knees, bent over.
Santi Aldama played 39 minutes.
Santi Aldama played 39 minutes.
Not ideal.
Tired. They're not practicing today. They're not practicing, Thursday. So I already, learned that. So they're going to fly out to Houston get a little rest, but they don't have a lot of time. So it'll be really interesting to see what they look like. But we're going to talk about all that, and we're going to get more into it. Houston, and we're going to preview Dallas. I actually got a little bit of a look at Dallas, watching, them and this new look unit with Christian Wood and getting Tim Hardaway back healthy. But we'll talk about all of that on the next episode.
Division games don't matter as much as maybe they used to. But obviously they matter in terms of the overall scheme of things because those are the teams you're going to play against the most. So a preview of some divisional battles between a young and hungry Houston team and then, of course, the Dallas Mavericks, who figure to be in that title conversation, just like these Memphis Grizzlies hope to be. Rejoice, the Memphis Grizzlies won on Grizmas. Oh, happy Grizmas Day it was. It was great to see FedEx Forum live and hopping. Awesome to see all the pictures and the videos and just how happy everybody was that the NBA is back and that the Memphis Grizzlies in particular are back. Continue to make Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day. Rate, subscribe, review, leave comments on YouTube, all of those good things. Continue to make us part of your Memphis Grizzlies fan experience. It is appreciated. For my co-host, Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Until next time, stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies.